The silence was deafening. I stood at the altar of St. Catherine's Chapel in downtown Nashville, my vintage lace gown cascading around me like spilled moonlight, staring at rows upon rows of empty mahogany pews. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across vacant seats that should have been filled with the people who mattered most. My bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus trembled in my hands, and I could feel the florist's carefully applied makeup beginning to crack under the weight of unshed tears. Pastor Williams shuffled his feet uncomfortably behind me, his weathered hands clutching his worn leather Bible. The organist, Mrs. Henderson, had stopped playing 20 minutes ago when it became painfully obvious that no one else was coming. The only sounds now were the distant hum of Nashville traffic and the soft whisper of the air conditioning that seemed to echo mockingly through the cavernous space. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Donna Blackwell, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it had become a monument to everything I'd spent 28 years trying to ignore about my family. Every single person who had raised me, supported me, claimed to love me had chosen not to be here. Not one. 3 months earlier, when I'd sent out those ivory wedding invitations with the gold embossed lettering, I'd been so careful about the date. March 15th had seemed perfect, a Saturday in spring when the Tennessee weather would be mild and beautiful. I'd checked with everyone, made sure there were no conflicts, no prior commitments that would keep my family away from the most important moment of my life. My parents, Robert and Linda Blackwell, had seemed genuinely excited when I'd called them in their suburban Atlanta home to tell them about the engagement. Mom had actually cried happy tears, talking about how she'd always dreamed of planning my wedding, how she'd saved special recipes for the reception, how she couldn't wait to see me walk down the aisle. Dad had grumbled about the cost of a tuxedo rental, but in that fond, paternal way that let me know he was proud. My older sister, Christina, had squealed with delight during our video call, immediately launching into plans for my bachelorette party and demanding to know every detail about the proposal. My younger brother, Marcus, had even offered to take time off from his demanding residency program at Emory University Hospital to be there, joking that he'd never seen me this happy and wouldn't miss it for the world. The aunts, uncles, and cousins had all responded with enthusiastic yes RSVPs. Aunt Patricia had even called to ask if she could bring her famous peach cobbler for the reception. Uncle James had started planning the drive from Birmingham weeks in advance. My cousin Sarah, who lived in Memphis, had already booked her hotel room and was posting excited countdown updates on social media. But then came February 28th, exactly 2 weeks before my wedding day. That was when Christina called with news that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and priorities. "Donna, you're not going to believe this," she'd said, her voice bubbling with excitement that made my stomach clench with inexplicable dread. "Marcus got accepted into that exclusive medical research program in Switzerland, the one he's been dreaming about for years. They want him to start immediately, and they're throwing this huge send-off celebration on March 15th. Mom and Dad are organizing the whole thing at the country club." The words hit me like ice water. March 15th, my wedding day. "But Christina," I'd said, my voice barely above a whisper, "that's my wedding day. We've had this date planned for months. Everyone already has it on their calendar." There was a pause that stretched too long, filled with the kind of awkward silence that speaks volumes. When Christina finally responded, her tone had shifted to something patronizing, almost dismissive. "Oh, come on, Donna, you can change your date, can't you? I mean, Marcus only gets one shot at this research program. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Your wedding? Well, you and Jake can get married anytime, right? It's just a party." Just a party. Those 3 words echoed in my mind for days afterward. My wedding, the day I'd been dreaming about since I was a little girl playing dress-up in Mom's old bridesmaid dresses, was reduced to just a party that could be rescheduled to accommodate my brother's career ambitions.
I'd tried reasoning with them. I'd called my parents directly, explaining that the chapel was booked months in advance, that we'd already sent invitations, that our guests had made travel arrangements. Dad hemmed and hawed, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, before finally saying, "Donna, honey, you understand how important this is for Marcus's future, don't you? Maybe you could just push your wedding back a few weeks." Mom had been even worse. She'd launched into a speech about how family meant making sacrifices for each other, how Marcus had worked so hard for this opportunity, how I should be more flexible and understanding. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was lecturing me about family sacrifice while asking me to sacrifice my own wedding day. The calls had continued for days. Relatives who'd been excited about my wedding suddenly had concerns about the date. Aunt Patricia mentioned that Marcus's celebration would probably run late, and she might be too tired to travel to Nashville the next day. Uncle James wondered if I'd considered a summer wedding instead, saying the weather would be nicer. Cousin Sarah posted a long social media tribute to Marcus's achievement that didn't mention my wedding at all. One by one, they'd all made their choice. Marcus's send-off celebration at the prestigious Peachtree Hills Country Club versus my wedding at a small chapel in Nashville. The golden child's career milestone versus the family disappointment's romantic gesture. The decision had been unanimous, and it hadn't been in my favor. I'd held on to hope until the very last moment. Standing there in that empty chapel, I'd kept glancing at the doors, expecting them to burst open with my breathless, apologetic family rushing in with excuses about traffic or last-minute delays. But as the minutes ticked by and the silence grew heavier, the truth settled over me like a shroud. They weren't coming. They had made their priorities crystal clear, and I wasn't one of them. The only person who seemed to understand the magnitude of this betrayal was my maid of honor, Rebecca Martinez, my best friend since college. She stood beside me now in her soft pink bridesmaid dress, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury that she was trying desperately to contain for my sake. "Donna," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on my arm, "we don't have to do this today. We can postpone, figure something else out."
But that was exactly what they expected me to do. To crumble, to postpone, to accommodate their choices, and make myself smaller so they could feel better about their decision. The old Donna might have done exactly that, might have called off the wedding and slunk back home to lick her wounds in private. Instead, I felt something new stirring in my chest, a cold, fierce determination that I'd never experienced before. They wanted to treat my wedding like it didn't matter? Fine. But I was done making myself invisible to make their lives easier. I looked at Rebecca, then at Pastor Williams, then at the handful of Jake's family members who had made the trip from Los Angeles to be here. His parents, Margaret and Tom Sullivan, sat in the front row looking uncomfortable but supportive. His sister Katie was there with her husband and kids, all of them dressed in their Sunday best, and clearly confused about why the bride's side of the chapel was completely empty. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Jake's family had traveled across the entire country to be here. They'd taken time off work, bought plane tickets, booked hotel rooms, all to celebrate our union. Meanwhile, my own family couldn't be bothered to drive a few hours to witness what was supposedly one of the most important days of my life. The contrast was stark and painful, but it was also illuminating. It showed me exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy of importance, and it wasn't anywhere near the top. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let their absence define this moment. I wasn't going to let their cruel indifference steal my joy or diminish the love I shared with Jake. But I also wasn't going to pretend that this betrayal didn't cut deep, or that there wouldn't be consequences for choosing to abandon me on the most important day of my life. The old Donna would have suffered in silence. The new Donna was about to show them exactly what they'd given up when they decided I wasn't worth their time. What I hadn't told anyone, including Rebecca, was that my husband-to-be wasn't just Jake Sullivan from Los Angeles. He was Jake Sullivan, the Jake Sullivan, the actor whose face graced movie screens across America, whose voice had launched 1,000 fan accounts, and whose smile had been featured on the cover of People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive issue just 6 months ago. We'd met 2 years earlier at a coffee shop in West Hollywood, of all places. I'd been in LA for a graphic design conference, jet-lagged and desperately searching for caffeine at 5 in the morning. He'd been there too, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses despite the early hour, trying to blend in with the pre-dawn crowd of nurses, construction workers, and other early risers. I hadn't recognized him at first. Without the designer suits and professional lighting, he'd just been a tired-looking guy in worn jeans and a faded Vanderbilt University t-shirt, fumbling with his phone while waiting for his order. When the barista called out Jake and he'd stepped forward at the same time I did, apparently we'd both ordered the same complicated oat milk monstrosity, we'd laughed about it. "Great minds think alike," he'd said, his voice rougher than it sounded in interviews, more real somehow. "Either that or we both have terrible taste in coffee," I'd replied, and something in his expression had shifted. Later, he'd tell me it was the first time in months that someone had teased him without wanting something in return. We'd ended up sharing a table by the window, talking about everything except his career. He'd asked about my design work, been genuinely interested in my thoughts on branding and visual storytelling. I'd told him about growing up in Georgia, about my complicated relationship with my family, about my dreams of opening my own studio someday. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. It wasn't until 3 hours later, when his phone started buzzing with increasingly frantic calls from someone named Marcus, not my brother Marcus, but his agent Marcus Goldman, that reality crashed back in. Jake had sighed, run his hand through his dark hair, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I should probably tell you something," he'd said. "This is going to sound crazy, but I'm kind of famous, like really famous. And if we keep talking, if this becomes something, your life is going to get very complicated very fast." He'd been right about the complicated part. Dating Jake meant navigating paparazzi, learning to ignore social media rumors, and getting used to strangers having opinions about every aspect of our relationship. His publicist, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Cheng, had initially been horrified by me. I wasn't an actress or a model or someone who could advance Jake's career. I was just a graphic designer from Georgia who wore thrift store dresses and had never been photographed by anyone more professional than my college roommate. But Jake had been adamant. "I'm not dating her for publicity," he'd told Diana during one particularly heated phone conversation that I'd accidentally overheard. "I'm dating her because she makes me laugh, because she's brilliant, because when I'm with her, I remember who I am when the cameras stop rolling." The media attention had been intense, but not cruel, at least not initially. Entertainment Tonight had dubbed me the mystery woman who stole Jake Sullivan's heart. People magazine had done a surprisingly sweet profile about our normal relationship, how we cooked dinner together, binged Netflix shows, and took long walks without security details. My family's reaction to dating Jake had been complicated. At first, they'd been thrilled, in that shallow way that people get excited about celebrity-adjacent fame. Mom had started following Jake's Instagram account and screenshotting his posts to send to her book club friends. Dad had suddenly become interested in every movie Jake had ever made, even the terrible romantic comedy from his early career that Jake himself refused to discuss. Christina had been the worst, constantly asking for insider information about other celebrities and hinting that maybe Jake could help Marcus network with some important people in Los Angeles. She'd even suggested that I could probably get them tickets to movie premieres and award shows, as if my relationship was some kind of entertainment vending machine for the family's benefit. But their excitement had cooled considerably when Jake and I had gotten serious. When we'd moved in together, when he'd started talking about marriage, when it became clear that this wasn't just a fling that would eventually burn out and leave them with good stories to tell at dinner parties. The engagement had been beautiful and private, just the two of us on a beach in Malibu at sunset.
Jake had been nervous, stumbling over words he'd probably rehearsed a dozen times, but his sincerity had been heartbreaking. He'd told me he'd never believed in soulmates until he met me, that I was the first person who'd ever made him want to build a real life outside of Hollywood's spotlight. When I'd said yes, when he'd slipped his grandmother's vintage engagement ring onto my finger, I'd felt like the luckiest woman in the world for about 48 hours. That's how long it had taken for the engagement to hit the entertainment news cycle. Diana had tried to keep it quiet, but someone at the jewelry store where Jake had gotten the ring resized had leaked the story. Within days, my phone was ringing constantly with reporters wanting quotes, photographers were camping outside my apartment building, and my quiet life in Nashville had become a circus. My family's reaction to the engagement news had been telling. The first calls had been congratulatory, but underneath the excitement, I could hear something else: calculation. Mom had immediately started planning what she called the wedding of the century, talking about guest lists that included A-list celebrities I'd never met and venues that would photograph well for magazine spreads. Christina had been even more transparent about her expectations. "This is going to be amazing for all of us," she gushed during one phone call. "Think about the connections, the opportunities. Marcus could probably get introductions to some important people in entertainment, and Dad's business could really benefit from this kind of exposure." That's when I'd understood something crucial about my family's newfound enthusiasm for my relationship. They weren't excited for me, they were excited for what I could do for them. The engagement wasn't a celebration of love, it was a business opportunity they intended to exploit. Jake had seen it too. During one particularly tense family dinner in Atlanta, when Uncle James had cornered Jake about potentially investing in his failing restaurant chain, Jake had remained polite but distant. Later, in our hotel room, he'd held me while I cried about my family's transparent opportunism. "I'm sorry," I'd whispered against his chest. "I'm so sorry they're like this." "You're not responsible for their behavior," he'd said firmly, "but I need you to understand something. The people who love you for who you are will be there no matter what. The people who love you for what you can give them will disappear the moment you stop being useful." His words had proven prophetic. The moment I'd refused to turn our wedding into a publicity spectacle, the moment I'd insisted on a small, intimate ceremony instead of the media circus they'd envisioned, my family's enthusiasm had curdled into resentment. They'd wanted me to leverage Jake's fame for their benefit, and when I wouldn't do it, I'd become a disappointment again. Worse than a disappointment, I'd become someone who was deliberately withholding opportunities from them, someone who was being selfish with resources they felt entitled to. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been the family member they'd underlooked, the one whose achievements didn't matter, whose needs came last. But the moment I'd gained access to something they wanted, I'd become the most important person in their world, not because they valued me, but because they valued what I represented.
And now, standing in this empty chapel, I realized that their absence wasn't really about Marcus's opportunity at all. It was about punishment. They were showing me what happened when I didn't give them what they wanted, when I chose my own happiness over their ambitions. The old Donna would have internalized that message, would have believed she deserved to be abandoned for refusing to be more generous with her famous boyfriend's connections. But the new Donna, the one who'd spent 2 years learning what real love looked like, what genuine support felt like, saw their absence for what it truly was. It wasn't a reflection of my worth, it was a revelation of theirs. The ceremony itself was unlike anything I could have imagined when I'd first started planning this day. Pastor Williams, bless his heart, had adapted to the situation with the grace of someone who'd officiated dozens of weddings under unusual circumstances. He'd quietly rearranged the service to accommodate our much smaller gathering, speaking in softer tones that somehow made the vast empty space feel more intimate rather than hollow. Jake had appeared from the vestry wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been sculpted specifically for his frame, which, knowing Jake's stylist, it probably had been. But despite the Hollywood perfection of his appearance, his eyes held the same vulnerability I'd seen that first morning in the coffee shop. When he looked at me walking down that endless aisle with no father to escort me, no family to witness the moment, His expression shifted to something fierce and protective. Rebecca had stepped up without being asked, linking her arm through mine and walking me down the aisle with a confidence that made me feel less alone. She'd whispered jokes under her breath, keeping me steady when my legs threatened to give out under the weight of what was happening. "You know," she'd mumbled as we passed the empty pews, "most brides worry about too many people watching them walk down the aisle. You get to focus entirely on the only person who actually matters." She was right. As I reached the altar and saw Jake's face, the way his breath caught, the way his eyes filled with something that looked suspiciously like tears, the way he mouthed, "You're beautiful," like it was a prayer, I realized something profound. This moment, this exchange of vows, this promise we were making to each other, was exactly what it was supposed to be. Everything else was just decoration. The vows themselves were personal ones we'd written, full of inside jokes and promises that had nothing to do with publicity or image management. Jake promised to always make sure there was good coffee in the house, to listen to my terrible singing in the car without complaint, to remind me of my own strength when I forgot it. I promised to keep him grounded, to love the man behind the public persona, to build a life with him that was ours alone. When Pastor Williams pronounced us husband and wife, when Jake kissed me with the kind of tenderness that made Rebecca sniffle audibly, I felt something click into place. Not just the legal reality of marriage, but something deeper. I was no longer Donna Blackwell, the overlooked daughter who never quite measured up. I was Donna Sullivan, half of a partnership that had been chosen with intention and commitment. The reception was supposed to have been held at the historic Hermitage Hotel downtown, with a guest list of 85 people and a menu that had taken months to finalize. Instead, we found ourselves at a small restaurant called the Continental, a cozy mid-century modern place that Jake's father had suggested. Tom Sullivan had quietly called ahead while we were taking photos, explaining the situation to the manager and arranging for a private dining room that could accommodate our dramatically reduced party. The staff at the Continental treated us like royalty, despite the fact that our reception consisted of 6 adults and 2 children sitting around a table meant for 20. They'd brought out their best china, arranged flowers from their own garden as centerpieces, and even managed to produce a small wedding cake from a bakery down the street. It was nothing like what I'd planned, but it was perfect in its own unexpected way. Jake's family had rallied around me with a warmth that made the absence of my own family even more stark. Margaret Sullivan, Jake's mother, had pulled me aside before dinner and pressed a small wrapped box into my hands. "This was my mother's," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm. "She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. I was saving it for Jake's bride, whoever she turned out to be. I'm so glad it turned out to be you." Inside the box was a delicate pearl bracelet, clearly vintage, with a small diamond clasp that caught the light like captured starfire. When I'd tried to protest that it was too much, Margaret had shaken her head decisively. "Family isn't just about blood, honey. It's about the people who show up for you when it matters. You've shown up for Jake in ways that have made him happier than I've ever seen him. That makes you family to us." The contrast was devastating. Here were people who'd known me for less than 2 years, treating me with more love and acceptance than my own blood relatives had shown in 28 years. Jake's sister Katie had even assigned her 7-year-old daughter Emma to be my official flower girl for the day, a role Emma took so seriously that she spent the entire dinner making sure my bouquet was positioned perfectly and that no one bumped my dress. But it was during the toasts that the real impact of the day hit me. Tom Sullivan had stood up, raising his glass of champagne, and spoke with the kind of eloquence that made it clear where Jake had inherited his ability to command a room. "I've watched my son navigate a very complicated world for the past decade," he'd said, his voice carrying easily through the small dining room. "I've seen him surrounded by people who wanted things from him, who saw him as a stepping stone to their own ambitions. I've worried about whether he'd ever find someone who loved Jake Sullivan the person, not Jake Sullivan the celebrity." He'd paused, looking directly at me with eyes that were remarkably similar to his son's. "Donna, you've given my son something I wasn't sure he'd ever find, the chance to be himself without apology or performance. You've made him braver, kinder, and more authentic than I've seen him since he was a child. Any family that would miss this moment, that would choose not to witness this kind of love, has made a mistake they'll regret for the rest of their lives. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Everyone at that table understood what he wasn't saying directly, that my family's absence was their loss, not mine. But more than that, he was welcoming me into a different kind of family, one based on choice and commitment rather than obligation and guilt. Rebecca had been the last to speak, and her toast had been characteristically direct. "I've known Ghana since college," she'd said, her voice slightly rough with emotion. "I've watched her make herself smaller for people who never deserved her kindness. I've seen her apologize for taking up space, for having opinions, for wanting things that mattered to her. Today, she married someone who sees her for who she really is, brilliant, talented, generous, and strong as hell. And today, she finally has a family that deserves her." As the evening wound down, as we said goodbye to Jake's family and prepared to head to our hotel, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. The people who'd shown up today, Rebecca, the Sullivans, even Pastor Williams and the staff at the Continental, had given me something my blood family never had. They'd shown me what it felt like to be truly seen, truly valued, truly loved without conditions or expectations. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the evening with calls and texts from Atlanta, but I'd ignored them all. Whatever my family wanted to say now, after deliberately choosing to miss my wedding, could wait. Tonight was about celebrating the life Jake and I were building together, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be there for us. But even as I basked in the warmth of my new family's acceptance, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. My biological family's calculated cruelty, their deliberate abandonment of me on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They'd wanted to teach me a lesson about the consequences of not giving them what they wanted. What they didn't realize was that they'd taught me a much more valuable lesson about the kind of people they really were and the kind of daughter I no longer needed to be. The honeymoon suite at the Hutton Hotel was supposed to be our quiet retreat before flying to Italy the next morning for 2 weeks in Tuscany. Instead, it became the command center for what Jake would later call Operation Reality Check. By 10 o'clock that night, my phone had accumulated 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, and 14 voicemails from various family members, all with increasing levels of panic and desperation. Jake poured himself a glass of the champagne the hotel had sent up as a congratulatory gift and settled into the armchair by the window, his bow tie undone and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as he watched me stare at my phone with growing disbelief. "Want to share what's got them so worked up?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. I scrolled through the messages, my eyebrows climbing higher with each one. The earliest texts had been almost casual. Christina wondering why I wasn't answering my phone, Mom asking if the wedding had gone well. But as the hours had passed and I hadn't responded, the tone had shifted dramatically. "Listen to this," I said, opening the first voicemail and putting it on speaker. Dad's voice filled the room, tight with barely controlled anger. "Donna, you need to call us back immediately. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus's event is all over social media, and people are asking questions we can't answer. Some reporter called the house wanting to know why Jake Sullivan's bride's family wasn't at her wedding. You're making us look like terrible people." Jake snorted softly. "They're doing that all by themselves." The next message was from Christina, her voice shrill with panic. "Donna, please pick up. People are posting pictures of your empty wedding chapel online. Someone tagged Jake in a post about how sad it looked, and now his fans are asking where your family was. This is turning into a nightmare. You have to do something to fix this." But it was the message from Marcus that made my blood run cold. His voice was different from the others, not panicked or angry, but calculating, cold. "Donna, I know you're upset about the wedding timing, but this tantrum needs to stop. My colleagues in the medical community are starting to ask questions about my family dynamics, and that's not good for my career.
I need you to post something on social media explaining that you chose to have a small wedding, that we're all supportive and close. Do it tonight, or there will be consequences. Consequences. The word hung in the air like a threat, and Jake's expression darkened considerably. Play that one again, he said, quietly.
I did, and watched as my husband's face transformed into something I'd never seen before. Not angry exactly, but utterly focused in a way that reminded me that Jake hadn't gotten where he was by being passive or naive. He'd navigated Hollywood politics, contract negotiations, and media manipulation for over a decade. He knew how power worked, and he knew how to use it. "Donna," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made me look up from my phone. "I need you to understand something. What happened today wasn't just about them missing your wedding. It was about them sending you a message that you don't matter, that your happiness is negotiable, that you exist to serve their needs." He stood up, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Nashville, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Now they're panicking because their little power play backfired. Instead of teaching you a lesson, they've exposed themselves. And they want you to clean up their mess, to lie for them, to protect their reputations at the expense of your own truth. I felt something shifting inside me, the same fierce determination I'd felt in the chapel earlier. So what do we do? Jake turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw the full force of the strategic mind that had built his career. We give them exactly what they're afraid of. We tell the truth. Over the next hour, Jake walked me through something I'd never fully understood: the power of narrative control. He explained how stories spread in the digital age, how public sympathy worked, how timing could amplify or diminish a message's impact. "Your family is counting on you staying quiet," he said, pulling out his laptop and opening several social media platforms. "They're betting that you'll be too embarrassed or too polite to let people know what really happened. They want you to protect their image while your own gets sacrificed." He showed me what was already happening online. Someone, probably one of Jake's fans who'd been following our engagement story, had posted photos from outside the chapel earlier that day. The images were stark and telling. A beautiful wedding setup with no guests on the bride's side, concerned-looking staff, and me looking devastated in my wedding dress. The post had only a few hundred likes so far, but the comments were already telling a story. Jake's fans were genuinely confused and concerned. They'd been following our relationship for 2 years, had seen photos of me with my family at various events, and couldn't understand why none of them had been at the wedding. "This is where it gets interesting," Jake said, clicking on another tab. "Look at this." He'd found Marcus's social media accounts, which were public because of his medical career aspirations. The most recent posts showed elaborate photos from his send-off celebration at the country club. My entire family smiling and laughing, raising toasts, celebrating his achievement. The timestamps showed the photos had been taken at exactly the same time I'd been standing at the altar in an empty chapel. "They documented their choice," Jake said simply. "They posted proof that they were all together celebrating while you were alone on your wedding day. They literally created the evidence of their abandonment." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold fury building in my chest. They were so proud of choosing him over me that they posted it online. "And now they're realizing that their cruelty has witnesses," Jake said. "Your story isn't just something that happened in private anymore. It's becoming public, and they can't control the narrative." My phone buzzed again, another call from Christina. This time I answered. "Donna, thank God," she gasped before I could say anything. "You have to post something right now. People are starting to ask questions, and some of Jake's fans are getting really nasty in the comments. They're calling us terrible people, saying we abandoned you. You have to tell them it's not true." "But it is true," I said quietly. "You did abandon me." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Christina spoke again, her voice was sharp with desperation. "Don't be dramatic, Donna. We had a scheduling conflict. These things happen. But if you don't fix this narrative, it's going to hurt all of us. Marcus's reputation, Dad's business, Mom's standing in the community. Is that what you want? To destroy your own family out of spite?" I looked at Jake, who was watching me with steady, supportive eyes. He nodded slightly, a gesture that said he trusted me to handle this however I needed to. Christina, I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. You made a choice. You all made a choice. And now you're facing the consequences of that choice. I'm not going to lie to protect you from the results of your own actions. Donna, please. I hung up. Almost immediately, my phone started buzzing again, but this time I powered it off completely. The sudden silence in the hotel room was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of Nashville's nightlife filtering through the windows. Jake closed his laptop and came to sit beside me on the bed, taking my hands in his. How do you feel? Terrified, I admitted, but also free. For the first time in my life, I'm not worried about making them angry or disappointed. They can't be more disappointed in me than they already were, and I can't be more hurt by them than I already am. And now? He asked gently. I thought about the photos Marcus had posted, about my family's smiling faces celebrating while I'd stood alone in that chapel. I thought about the threatening voicemail, the demands that I lied to protect their reputations, the assumption that I would sacrifice my own truth to make their lives easier. Now, I said, feeling something crystallize inside me, they're going to learn what it costs to treat someone like they don't matter. They wanted to send me a message today. Tomorrow, I'm going to send them back. I woke up the next morning to something I'd never experienced before, the sound of my husband's voice drifting from the living area of our suite, speaking in low, measured tones to someone on the phone. Not Jake the actor giving an interview, but Jake the strategic thinker, implementing a plan. When I emerged from the bedroom in the hotel's plush robe, he was ending a call with Diana Chang, his publicist. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his eyes warming as he saw me. The name still sent a little thrill through me, especially the way he said it, like he was savoring the words. "What's the situation?" I asked, accepting the coffee he handed me. It was perfect, exactly the way I liked it, and I realized he'd probably been up for hours orchestrating whatever was about to unfold. Jake's expression grew serious as he opened his laptop. "Diana's been monitoring the social media situation since 5 this morning. Your family's panic was justified. The story is spreading faster than they anticipated, and it's not going in the direction they hoped." He turned the screen toward me, and I nearly choked on my coffee. The original post about the empty chapel had exploded overnight. It now had over 50,000 likes and nearly 8,000 comments. More concerning for my family, other posts had started appearing. People sharing their own stories of family abandonment, expressing outrage on my behalf, and most damaging of all, screenshots of Marcus's celebration posts with timestamps clearly showing they were taken during my wedding ceremony. Jake's mystery bride's family skips wedding for brother's party was trending on Twitter. Entertainment blogs had picked up the story. Someone had even created a hashtag. Hashtag Donna deserved better. "This is insane," I whispered, scrolling through comment after comment of strangers defending me with a ferocity that was both touching and overwhelming. "It gets better," Jake said, though his tone suggested it would be better for us and decidedly worse for my family. "Diana reached out to her contacts at Entertainment Tonight and Access Hollywood. They want to do an exclusive interview with us about the wedding, the family situation, and our plans moving forward." I looked up at him, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. "Jake, if we do this, there's no taking it back. Once this story goes national, my family will never forgive me." "Donna," he said, sitting beside me and taking my hands, "they've already shown you exactly how much their forgiveness is worth. The question isn't whether they'll forgive you, it's whether you're finally ready to stop needing their approval." Before I could respond, my phone, which I'd turned back on to check messages, started ringing. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen, and when I answered, her voice was breathless with excitement and concern. "Donna, please tell me you've seen what's happening online. It's everywhere. Your story is everywhere, and people are furious on your behalf. But also, your mom just called me looking for you. She sounded completely panicked." "What did you tell her?"
That you were on your honeymoon and probably not taking calls from people who skipped your wedding. Rebecca's voice carried a satisfaction that made me smile despite everything. But seriously, they're in full crisis mode. I think they finally understand what they've done. After I hung up, Jake showed me the missed calls that had accumulated overnight. 37 more attempts from family members. But now, there were also calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, producers, people who wanted to hear my side of the story. There's something else, Jake said carefully. Diana found out that someone approached the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with the story. They're planning to run a piece about it tomorrow, with or without our cooperation. Your father's business is mentioned, along with Marcus's medical career aspirations. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about social media anymore. This was about real-world consequences. Dad's architectural firm potentially losing clients who were disgusted by the family's behavior. Marcus's reputation in the medical community taking a hit. The whole family's standing in their Atlanta social circles crumbling. They're going to blame me for all of it, I said quietly.
They already are, Jake replied, showing me a text that had just come in from Christina. Are you happy now? Dad might lose the Morrison contract because of your drama. Mom can't show her face at the country club. Fix this now or you're dead to us. Dead to them. The words should have hurt, but instead, I felt something like relief. They were finally saying out loud what their actions had been telling me for years. You know what the strangest part is? I said, looking at Jake. I spent my whole life trying to earn their love, their respect, their attention. And now that I finally have something they want, a way to make this story go away, I don't want to give it to them. Jake's smile was proud and a little fierce. That's because you're finally understanding your own worth. Diana called back an hour later with an update that changed everything. Jake, you need to see this, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Marcus posted something on his Instagram this morning. He's trying to control the narrative, but it's backfiring spectacularly. Jake put the call on speaker, and Diana read Marcus's post aloud. Disappointed by the negativity surrounding my family this week. My sister chose to have a small, intimate wedding while I had a career milestone celebration. There was no conflict or abandonment, just different events on the same day. The media is twisting this story for clicks, and my sister's new husband should be protecting her from this circus instead of encouraging it. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake started laughing, not with humor, but with the kind of disbelief that comes from witnessing spectacular stupidity. Jake said, shaking his head, he just accused me of exploiting you for publicity while simultaneously lying about what actually happened, and he did it publicly. Diana's voice was crisp with professional satisfaction. The comments on that post are brutal. People are posting screenshots of his celebration photos with timestamps, calling him out for gaslighting his sister. It's worse than if he'd said nothing at all. I stared at the laptop screen, watching the comments roll in under Marcus's post in real time. Hundreds of people were defending me, sharing their own stories of family betrayal, expressing outrage at his attempt to rewrite history. My brother, the golden child who'd never faced consequences for anything in his life, was getting systematically destroyed by strangers on the internet. There's more, Diana continued. Entertainment Tonight wants to do the interview this afternoon. They're willing to film it here in Nashville, keep it intimate and respectful. But Donna, if you do this, you need to understand, this becomes the official story. Your version becomes the truth on record. I looked at Jake, who was watching me with steady, supportive eyes. What do you think I should do? I think, he said carefully, that you should ask yourself what you wish someone had done for you when you were younger, when you were being overlooked and undervalued. What would have meant the world to that little girl who never felt like she was enough? The answer came to me immediately, clear as daylight. I would have wanted someone to stand up and say that I mattered, that my feelings were valid, that the way I was being treated was wrong, and that I deserved better. I'll do the interview, I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Diana was already taking notes. Name them. I want to talk about more than just the wedding. I want to talk about what it's like to grow up feeling invisible in your own family. I want other people who've experienced this to know they're not alone. And I want to make it clear that this isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. That's my girl. As Diana began coordinating the logistics, my phone buzzed with another call from home. This time it was Dad, and his voicemail was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. His voice was shaking, whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Donna, this has gone far enough. People are calling the office, asking questions about the family situation. I may have to let employees go if I lose any more clients over this mess you've created. Your mother is devastated. Marcus's future is in jeopardy. You need to call off this media circus immediately, or you're no longer welcome in this family. I deleted the message without finishing it. They still didn't understand that they weren't offering me anything I wanted anymore. Being unwelcome in a family that had never truly welcomed me wasn't a threat. It was a liberation. The interview was scheduled for 3 o'clock. By 2:30, I was in hair and makeup in our hotel suite, being prepared to tell the truth to a national audience. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of my family's reaction. They'd taught me not to need their approval. Now, I was going to teach them what that actually meant. The Entertainment Tonight crew transformed our hotel suite into a professional studio with an efficiency that was almost magical. Soft lighting, perfectly positioned cameras, and a backdrop that suggested intimacy without revealing our location. The interviewer, Amanda Rodriguez, was a seasoned professional who'd covered everything from celebrity scandals to humanitarian crises, and her approach was exactly what I'd hoped for, respectful but unflinching. We're going to start with some basic questions about the wedding, Amanda explained as the crew finished their setup. Then we'll move into the family dynamics. I want you to know that we're not looking for salacious drama here. We're interested in your truth, and we want to give you space to tell it authentically. Jake sat slightly off camera, close enough that I could see his encouraging nods, but far enough away that this was clearly my story to tell. Diana had positioned herself where she could monitor social media responses in real time, ready to gauge public reaction as the interview progressed. Rolling in 3, 2, Amanda's warm smile was genuinely reassuring as the cameras started recording. I'm here with Donna Sullivan, who married actor Jake Sullivan yesterday in what should have been a celebration of love, but instead became a story that's captured national attention. Donna, thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to set the record straight, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Let's start with yesterday. Tell us what happened at your wedding. I took a breath and began with the image that had started it all, standing in that empty chapel, surrounded by vacant pews where my family should have been sitting. As I described the morning, Amanda's questions were gentle but probing, helping me paint a picture that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Your brother Marcus posted on social media yesterday claiming there was no abandonment, that you simply chose to have a small wedding. How do you respond to that? This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Marcus is trying to rewrite history to protect his own reputation, I said, looking directly into the camera. The truth is documented. We have RSVPs. We have contracts for catering that was meant to serve 85 people. We have a chapel that was set up for a full ceremony. This wasn't planned as a small wedding. It became small because my entire family chose to attend my brother's celebration instead. Amanda leaned forward slightly. That must have been devastating. It was clarifying, I said, surprising myself with the word choice. For years, I told myself that my family's treatment of me was just their way, that I was being too sensitive when I felt overlooked or undervalued. Standing in that empty chapel forced me to confront the reality that I'd been making excuses for people who had shown me repeatedly where I ranked in their priorities. Jake, you were there. What was it like watching your new wife go through that? Jake's voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath it. It was heartbreaking and infuriating, but it was also the moment I realized just how strong Donna really is. Another person might have collapsed under that kind of betrayal. She chose to continue with our ceremony, to celebrate our love despite their absence. Amanda turned back to me.
You've received thousands of messages of support since this story broke. What's that been like? Overwhelming in the best way, I said, feeling emotion catch in my throat. So many people have shared their own stories of family rejection, of being the scapegoat or the forgotten child. I had no idea how common this experience was. How many people carry this pain in silence because they're afraid of being seen as dramatic or ungrateful. Speaking of being seen as dramatic, your family has suggested that you're blowing this out of proportion, that you should have simply rescheduled your wedding. What's your response to that? I felt something crystallize inside me, all the years of gaslighting and minimization sharpening into perfect clarity. The expectation that I should rearrange my life to accommodate their choices is exactly the problem I'm talking about. This wasn't an emergency that conflicted with my wedding. This was a celebration that was planned after my wedding was already scheduled. They made a deliberate choice about whose important day mattered more. And that choice revealed something you'd been avoiding? It revealed everything I'd been avoiding, I said. That in my family, my needs have always been negotiable. My feelings have always been secondary. My achievements have always been less important than other people's. This wedding was just the most public example of a dynamic that's been in place my entire life. Amanda paused, consulting her notes. You mentioned achievements being overlooked. Can you give us some context? I graduated summa cum laude from Vanderbilt with a degree in graphic design. My family missed my graduation because Marcus had a medical school interview that same weekend. When I started my own design business, the family dinner conversation was about whether I was being realistic about my little hobby. When I got engaged to Jake, suddenly I was the most important person in their world, not because they valued me, but because they valued what I could potentially do for them. What do you mean by that? Jake and I had discussed this part carefully. They saw my relationship with Jake as a networking opportunity. There were expectations that I would leverage his connections for their benefit, requests for introductions to people in entertainment and business, suggestions that our wedding should be a publicity event that could benefit the whole family. And when you didn't comply with those expectations?
I became a disappointment again, I said simply. When I insisted on having the wedding I wanted rather than the media spectacle they envisioned, when I maintained boundaries about Jake's private life and professional relationships, their enthusiasm for my marriage cooled considerably. Amanda's next question caught me off guard with its directness. Do you think they deliberately chose to skip your wedding as punishment for not giving them what they wanted? I considered this carefully. I think they made a choice that revealed their true priorities. Whether it was conscious punishment or just indifference to my feelings, the result was the same. They showed me exactly where I stand in their hierarchy of importance. What do you want people to take away from your story? That your worth isn't determined by your family's treatment of you, I said, looking directly into the camera again. That it's okay to set boundaries, even with people you love. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And that sometimes the family you build is more important than the family you're born into. Have you heard from your family since this story broke? They've called repeatedly, but not to apologize or take responsibility. They've called to demand that I fix the situation, that I protect their reputations, that I clean up what they see as a mess I've created by telling the truth about what happened. And will you do that? For the first time during the interview, I smiled. No, I'm done protecting people who won't protect me. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. As the interview wrapped up, Amanda asked one final question. What's next for you and Jake? We're going to Italy for our honeymoon, as planned, I said. We're going to build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. And I'm going to continue being honest about my experiences because I've learned that my truth matters, whether my birth family agrees or not. When the cameras stopped rolling, Amanda shook my hand warmly. That was incredibly brave, she said. I think you're going to help a lot of people who've gone through similar experiences.
As the crew packed up, Diana was already monitoring the initial social media responses. The clips they're posting are going viral, she reported. The overwhelming response is supportive. People are sharing their own stories, talking about family scapegoating, celebrating your courage. But it was Jake's reaction that mattered most to me. He pulled me into his arms as soon as we were alone, holding me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "You just changed the conversation about family obligation and abuse. You turned your pain into power." My phone was buzzing again with calls from Atlanta, but for the first time since this whole situation began, I felt completely at peace with ignoring them. I'd said what needed to be said. The truth was out there now, and whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it as the scared, approval-seeking woman I'd been yesterday. I was facing it as Donna Sullivan, a woman who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less. The interview tonight aired 3 days later, while Jake and I were sitting on the terrace of our villa in Tuscany, sharing breakfast and watching the Italian countryside wake up in golden morning light. Diana had arranged for us to watch it via livestream, and what followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. Within hours of the broadcast, #DonnaDeservedBetter had evolved into something much larger than a trending hashtag. It became a movement. Thousands of people shared their own stories of family abandonment, scapegoating, and emotional abuse. Therapists posted educational content about family dynamics and trauma. Support groups formed. My story had become a catalyst for conversations that were long overdue. But the most unexpected development came that evening, when Jake showed me a post that had been shared nearly 1 million times. It was from a fan account called @SullivanSupporters, and it read, "If Donna's family won't show up for her, then we will. Any Sullivan family event, we're there in spirit. This woman deserves to know she has people who care about her." The post included a photo collage of the empty chapel, alongside pictures of Jake's fans from around the world holding handmade signs with messages like, "Donna, you matter," "Your worth isn't conditional," and "Team Sullivan forever." "Jake," I whispered, tears blurring my vision as I scrolled through hundreds of similar posts. "Look at this." What I was seeing was extraordinary. Jake's fans, people I'd never met, who knew me only through social media and interviews, had organized themselves into a support network for me. They'd created artwork celebrating our wedding, written letters about how my story had inspired them to set boundaries with their own families, and even started a scholarship fund for young women from dysfunctional families who wanted to pursue careers in design. "Jake," I whispered, tears blurring my vision as I scrolled through hundreds of similar posts. "Look at this." What I was seeing was extraordinary. Jake's fans, people I'd never met, who knew me only through social media and interviews, had organized themselves into a support network for me. They'd created artwork celebrating our wedding, written letters about how my story had inspired them to set boundaries with their own families, and even started a scholarship fund for young women from dysfunctional families who wanted to pursue careers in design.
This is incredible, Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. They're not just supporting you, they're creating real change. Meanwhile, the fallout in Atlanta was swift and severe. Dad's architectural firm had indeed lost the Morrison contract, along with 2 other major clients who publicly stated they couldn't work with someone who would abandon their daughter on her wedding day. Marcus's medical residency program had launched an investigation into his character and fitness after several colleagues brought the wedding situation to their attention. Mom had been quietly asked to step down from her position on the country club's board. The calls from my family had finally stopped, but not because they'd accepted responsibility for their actions. According to Rebecca, who'd been fielding calls from various relatives, they'd collectively decided that I was dead to them and that they would never speak to me again. "How does that make you feel?" Rebecca had asked during our video call from Italy. "Free," I'd answered without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, completely free." But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after we returned from our honeymoon, I received a package at our new home in Los Angeles. Inside was a letter from a woman named Sarah Chen in Portland, Oregon, along with a photo of herself in a wedding dress surrounded by strangers. Dear Donna, the letter read, your story gave me the courage to leave my toxic family and marry the man I love, even though they threatened to disown me if I didn't choose the husband they wanted for me. Like you, I had an empty chapel on my wedding day, but like you, I chose love over fear. I posted about it online, and dozens of strangers showed up to fill the pews. They sang, they cheered, they celebrated with us like family should. I wanted you to know that your courage created ripples that reached me across the country. Thank you for showing me that family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and showing up when it matters. The photo showed Sarah beaming in her wedding dress, surrounded by a diverse group of people holding flowers and wearing huge smiles. They weren't her relatives, they were her chosen family, people who decided that no one should stand alone on their wedding day. I started crying before I finished reading the letter, and by the time Jake found me, I was sobbing with a mixture of heartbreak and joy. She did what I was too scared to do, I told him, showing him the letter. She reached out for help, and people came. Real people, good people, who understood that love means showing up. Jake pulled me close, stroking my hair as I processed the magnitude of what was happening. Donna, you did reach out for help. You told your story, and look what happened. You've got an entire community of people who care about you now. He was right. Over the following months, Jake's fans became something I'd never expected, a genuine support system. They celebrated my birthday by donating to domestic violence shelters in my name. When I launched my expanded design business, they became my first clients and biggest promoters. When I gave a TEDx talk about family trauma and healing, they filled the audience and gave me a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. They sent me flowers on what would have been my first wedding anniversary with my family present. They created a hashtag for my design business. They showed up for me in ways my biological family never had, proving that love isn't about shared DNA, it's about shared values, respect, and genuine care. The most beautiful moment came exactly 1 year after my wedding day. Jake and I decided to renew our vows in the same chapel where we'd married, but this time we sent out an open invitation on social media. We expected maybe 20 or 30 people to show up. Instead, over 200 people came. Jake's fans, survivors of family abuse who'd found healing through my story, couples who'd been inspired to have their own boundary-setting weddings, and people who simply believed that love should always be witnessed and celebrated. As I walked down that same aisle where I'd stood alone and abandoned just 1 year before, I was surrounded by faces full of genuine joy and support. These weren't people who wanted something from me or who saw me as useful for their own purposes. These were people who showed up because they believed I mattered, because they understood that every person deserves to be celebrated and supported. When Pastor Williams renewed our vows, when Jake kissed me as our chosen family cheered, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged with exactly the people who deserved to be in my life. My biological family never reached out to reconcile. The last I heard, through mutual acquaintances, Marcus had completed his residency but struggled to match into the prestigious fellowship program he'd wanted. Dad's business had slowly recovered but never regained its former prominence. Mom had retreated from social activities entirely, bitter about what she called the public humiliation I'd caused. They'd built their lives around appearances, status, and conditional love, and when those foundations cracked under public scrutiny, they had nothing left to stand on. They'd chosen their pride over their daughter, and they'd have to live with that choice forever. But I no longer carried their dysfunction or their pain. I'd learned that the family you choose can be more loyal, more loving, and more genuine than the family you're born into. I'd discovered that my worth wasn't dependent on their approval, and that my happiness didn't require their participation. Jake and I built a beautiful life together, surrounded by people who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. We started a foundation to help young people from dysfunctional families pursue their dreams. We traveled the world, created art together, and filled our home with laughter and chosen family gatherings. And sometimes, when I looked at the photos from our vow renewal ceremony, at all those faces full of love and support, at the life I'd built by choosing myself over their expectations, I felt grateful for that empty chapel and that devastating abandonment. Because it taught me the most important lesson of my life, that the right people will always show up for you, and the wrong people will always show you exactly who they are. My job isn't to change the wrong people or earn the love of people who've decided I'm not worth their time. My job is to recognize the right people when they appear, to build a life worthy of their love, and to show up for others the way I always deserved to be shown for. In the end, my family did miss my wedding, but in trying to diminish me, they'd accidentally set me free to find something infinitely better. A life built on genuine love, mutual respect, and the unshakable knowledge that I was finally truly home. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.